Bang, bang, bang. Not a gun, not a knock, just the sound of someone trying to bulldoze my front door with the wrath of someone who hadn't had caffeine or therapy in years. It was 6:30 a.m. on a Saturday, and I was standing there in wrinkled boxers, blinking into the Florida sun, face to face with what can only be described as the final boss of Karen culture. Bleach blonde bob stiff as a helmet, matching polyester blazer that screamed fake authority, and a face twisted with righteous fury. "You need to move that boat right now," she screeched, before I could even find the word good morning. Behind her was a clipboard the size of a baking sheet and a roll of orange violation stickers so neon they could have guided planes at night. I didn't know it then, but that was the first shot in what would become a full-blown neighborhood war, one that ended with her moving out in a U-Haul while half the community clapped like it was the 4th of July. Leave a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. If you love wild, true-feeling stories packed with twists, justice, and just the right amount of HOA chaos, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story is even more jaw-dropping, and trust me, the surprises coming next, you won't want to miss them. Let me back up. My name's Colin Avery, 42, divorced, graphic designer, decent fisherman, full-time peace seeker. I moved to a little neighborhood called Golden Oaks Landing 18 months ago after my divorce, looking for quiet mornings and water views. Found a cozy place by the lake with an old dock and a 14-foot fishing boat I named Low Key. Every morning I'd sip coffee out there, watching the sun climb over the trees like it had nowhere better to be. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. That dock was my peace. That is, until Marla Vickery showed up like a lawsuit with legs. "Ma'am," I said, still mostly asleep, "that's my boat, on my dock. I've had it there since I moved in." She laughed. But not like a sane person laughs. No, it was the laugh you hear right before a villain presses a big red button. "Your dock? Honey, this is community water. And your little boat is in violation of Section 9.4b of the Homeowners Association guidelines." Then she slapped a neon sticker on Low Key, like she was issuing a search warrant. I blinked at her, trying to figure out what level of reality I had just been dropped into. I didn't remember seeing anything about a boat ban when I bought the house. I didn't remember signing away my right to sit quietly on a lake. I also didn't remember giving Marla the right to walk onto my property with a face full of rage and a stack of printer paper citations that looked like she'd made them during lunch break at a Michael's. "Sorry, but who are you?" I asked. "I'm Marla Vickery, HOA president," she declared like she was announcing a military rank. She handed me a violation notice so full of fonts and boldface it could have been a ransom note. "You have 24 hours to remove the watercraft or face a $500 0 cents per day fine," she said. My mouth opened, then shut. I wasn't sure whether to laugh, panic, or just crawl back into bed and pretend this was a dream powered by leftover pizza and stress. $500? 0 cents a day? For a boat on my own dock? This woman was not just angry, she was delusional with flair. I tried to be polite. Life's too short to argue with people who wear clipboards like accessories. "I think there's a mistake," I said, explaining that the dock was part of the property when I bought the house and that I had paperwork to prove it. Marla waved her hand like she was dismissing a waiter. "Paperwork can be wrong," she said, with the kind of confidence you only get from 3 years of bossing people around without ever being questioned. Then she took one more picture of my boat like it was evidence in a murder case, turned on her heel and stomped off, her shoes clicking like they were punctuating her rage. I stood there, barefoot, holding a fake legal notice printed on Office Max stock, wondering what just happened. And as I watched her walk back toward what I now realized was the smallest house in the entire neighborhood, something clicked. This wasn't about a boat. It wasn't even about a dock. This was about control. And Marla? Marla was a woman who saw a peaceful man sipping coffee and mistook that for weakness. I went inside and made a strong cup of coffee, the kind you sip when you know your life just got more complicated. I sat on the dock and stared at Low Key, wondering if maybe it was easier to just roll the boat into the garage and avoid the drama. But something in me snapped. I'd worked hard to get here. I'd rebuilt my life after divorce, fought for peace after chaos, and now some polyester dictator with a homemade badge was trying to ticket me into submission? No, not today. That's when I picked up the phone and called my ex-wife, Sharon. Yeah, I know, most people don't call their ex for help, but Sharon's a real estate attorney with a sharp tooth. Sharon showed up with the kind of expression that could make a grown man rethink his mortgage. She didn't even say hi, just dropped her leather briefcase on my kitchen table like a judge slamming down a gavel and said, "Show me the papers." She was in full lawyer mode. Ponytail tight, glasses on, lips pursed like someone had filed a motion against her cappuccino. I handed her every document I had from when I bought the house. The deed, the title, the original home inspection report, the so-called HOA welcome packet. Sharon flipped through the packet first, her brow raised at page 3. "This font combo should be a felony," she muttered. "What is this, Times New Roman mixed with papyrus?" I shrugged. Marla's idea of branding, I guess. Sharon held up one of the violation notices. "Colin, this isn't even on legal paper. It's like someone printed this off after watching an episode of Law and Order, Lawn Edition." That's when I realized I wasn't crazy. I was being policed by someone who thought using italics meant she had jurisdiction. She kept reading and muttering, then stopped cold. "This here," she tapped a line near the bottom, "claims you're in breach of Section 9.4b of the HOA water usage bylaws." I nodded. "Yeah." She shouted that at me like she was declaring war. Sharon squinted. "There's just one problem." She pulled out her phone and called a friend over at the county clerk's office. After some polite legal small talk and a brief hold, she hung up and looked me dead in the eye. "Colin, there's no record of an HOA for Golden Oaks Landing. Not a charter, not a corporate registration, not a single legally recognized board." I blinked. "So, what is it then?" Sharon leaned back and crossed her arms. "It's a hobby, Colin. An expensive, delusional, laminate-heavy hobby. As far as the county is concerned, there's no such thing as the Golden Oaks Homeowners Association, which means that Marla Vickery is not the president of anything, except, maybe, her own fantasy league of neighborhood tyranny. Now that hit like a gust of wind through a stack of fake tickets. I laughed, short and confused. "So all the warnings, the fees, the rules, they're just made up?" Sharon nodded slowly. "Made up, but enforced with conviction. That's what makes it dangerous. People don't question someone who acts like they know what they're doing. They hear OH and freeze. But if there's no legal structure, no filings, no board, then there's no authority. Marla's got as much power as a middle school hall monitor with a broken whistle. I couldn't help but picture Marla pacing her porch like a sheriff in a suburban spaghetti western, just itching to serve another warning to someone whose grass grew half an inch too tall. "She's been walking around like she's judge, jury, and lawn care executioner," I said. "And all she's got is a clipboard and confidence?" Sharon grinned. "Confidence is cheap, legal standing is expensive." And Marla clearly went with the budget option. I asked the obvious question. "So, what do I do? Call her out? Drop the hammer?" Sharon shook her head. "Not yet. You let her talk. Let her fine you again. Let her escalate, because the more fake power she tries to wield, the more public it becomes, the more people who witness it. When the truth comes out, it'll hit harder." She leaned forward. "People like Marla don't back down when you prove them wrong. They back down when they embarrass themselves trying to prove they're right." That part stuck with me. Embarrassment was her kryptonite, and Sharon's strategy was exactly the kind of calm chess game Marla wouldn't see coming. "So I let her keep digging?" I asked. "Let her build her little empire on sand?" Sharon smiled. "Exactly, because you're sitting on concrete, permitted, legal, survey-stamped concrete." That night, I poured myself a scotch and sat on the dock, watching the sun dip behind my clearly owned slice of lakefront peace, and I waited. Over the next few days, I observed, quietly, Marla didn't just run the HOA, she lived it. She walked the streets like a substitute teacher waiting for someone to chew gum. She measured fence heights, took notes on porch decor, and I'm pretty sure she once tried to photograph someone's wind chimes. She wore a visor like a crown and carried that clipboard like it was encrusted with HOA jewels. Every movement screamed authority, except it wasn't. It was theater. Bad theater, but effective. Because no one questioned her. I realized then that her rules were like jello in a wine glass, wobbly, dressed up, and completely inappropriate for the setting, but people respected it because it made noise and shimmered under light. Marla didn't need real power. She just needed to be the loudest voice in the room, and she had been. Until now. And then, like clockwork, she struck again. A new notice on my door, same orange sticker, new font. This one claimed I was in breach of a new Community Dock Preservation Act she said was ratified last fall. Sharon rolled her eyes so hard I thought she might sprain something. "This is not a real statute," she said, laughing under her breath. "It doesn't even have a reference number. She made up a law, like she's Congress in cargo pants." I looked down at the notice and realized it wasn't even printed straight. She hadn't even bothered to align the margins. That was when I knew Sharon was right. We let her go further, and she'd trip on her own power play. "So what's next?" I asked. Sharon grinned. "Next, we wait for her to get theatrical. Because someone like Marla always wants an audience, and when she calls a community meeting, and trust me she will, you'll be there, with your deed, with your permits, and with one hell of a punchline." And that, right there, was the moment I knew. The showdown was coming, and I wasn't just ready, I was looking forward to it. So yeah, I had the paperwork, the truth, and a lawyer with a sharper tongue than Marla's gavel. But I also had a neighbor who thought she was queen of a kingdom built on printer ink and bold fonts. And let me tell you, when people like that feel their grip slipping, they don't back down. They double down. You're going to want to see what she pulled next. If you've ever dealt with a fake authority in real life, hit that like button, because part 3? That's when Marla calls a full-blown emergency community meeting, and I bring the receipts. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the moment the HOA fantasy crashes face first into reality. I knew the moment I saw the flyers duct taped to every mailbox that the circus was coming to town, and Marla Vickery was the ringmaster, head clown, and popcorn vendor all in one. "Emergency HOA meeting. Community violations must be addressed. Attendance required," it read in bold Comic Sans, which is never a good sign. I showed up to the community center that evening with a manila folder full of legal truth and a travel mug of black coffee because I don't do community drama without caffeine. The room was half full, mostly retirees who looked like they'd rather be watching Wheel of Fortune, and a few curious neighbors wondering what Marla had cooked up this time. Then she strutted in like she was opening a TED Talk, wearing a glittery badge that said, "HOA President," and carrying a USB stick like it held state secrets. And wouldn't you know it, she brought a projector. We were in for a show. Marla opened her presentation with a dramatic click, and up popped a grainy photo of my boat, complete with a red circle and a diagonal line across it, like I'd brought contraband into a school zone. She spoke in the tone of someone unveiling a major crime syndicate. "This watercraft," she said, gesturing like Vanna White with a grudge, "violates community tranquility, aesthetic harmony, and approved shoreline regulation." I swear she made that last one up mid-sentence. The next slide was a bulleted list of threats to property value, which apparently included fishing rods, chipped paint, and unregistered leisure activity. I looked around the room. Half the crowd looked confused, the other half looked mildly entertained, like they were waiting for her to break into a karaoke version of "We Didn't Start the Fire" and me. I waited for the moment, because the next slide was labeled "Repeat Offender, Colin Avery." Now, I'm not the type to cause a scene, but there's something satisfying about calmly walking to the front of a room while someone's actively trying to drag your name through dollar store mud. I laid out my property survey, deed, and official permits on the table, opened the manila folder, and said, "I'd like to respond to these allegations." You could hear the air change in the room. According to county records and the documents from my home purchase, I began, this dock was included in the property line. This here, I pointed to the survey map, shows that the land and dock are privately owned by me. Not leased, not shared, not up for debate. A few heads nodded. One woman squinted at the map and whispered, well, I'll be damned. Marla's smile was starting to slide off her face like warm frosting on a bad cake. But instead of backing off, she did what all counterfeit kings do when confronted with truth. She changed the rules. She straightened her blazer, cleared her throat, and declared, in light of new information, I'm enacting an emergency rule effective immediately. All dock owners must pay a monthly maintenance fee of $2,000, 0 cents, to cover shoreline beautification and community risk management. You could feel the room tighten. It was one thing to whine about my boat, but $2,000 a month? For doing nothing? Someone coughed loudly. Mr. Jeffries in the back shook his head and muttered, that's more than my mortgage. Marla powered on, pretending the tide wasn't turning. We have to take action before things spiral, she insisted, flipping to a pie chart that might as well have been made in crayon. The chart had labels like peace preservation and visual flow integrity. I leaned over to Sharon, who had joined the meeting purely for the fireworks, and whispered, what even is visual flow integrity? She replied, deadpan, apparently your boat disrupts the metaphysical fabric of lakefront aesthetics. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. The more Marla talked, the more the room unraveled. People were pulling out their phones, exchanging texts, and side-eyeing each other like they'd just realized they'd been paying HOA dues to a woman with no legal backing. And yet, she pushed on, adding things like kayak permit fees and lawn color standards. She even suggested we fly-raise for a community flagpole initiative, which I assume would fly the flag of her ego. I could see it clearly now. Marla didn't want order, she wanted control. And when truth got in the way, she just repackaged it with a new rule in a font explosion. She wore authority like a Halloween costume, store-bought, ill-fitting, and ripped at the seams the minute someone asked for ID. But even then, I didn't interrupt. I just waited. Because the crowd was shifting. You could see it in their faces. The doubt had arrived. The spell was breaking. Finally, someone raised a hand. Excuse me, said Irene Walters, the widow from 3 houses down, but when exactly were you elected president? That one hit like a cymbal crash. Marla paused. I was appointed by the prior board, she said quickly. What board? Asked Mr. Jefferson. There hasn't been one since the McAllisters moved out, and they were more into potlucks than politics. The questions started piling on, and Marla started shrinking. Her voice got higher, her explanations thinner. Look, she snapped. I've been trying to keep this place livable. And that's when I stepped back in. No one's against order, Marla. We're against fantasy-based law. I live here. I respect this community. But what you're doing isn't leadership. It's performance art. Expensive, exhausting, and out of touch. A silence followed, and then the room did something I hadn't expected. They clapped, not wildly, not like a movie ending, but slow, deliberate applause from a group of neighbors who had just realized they weren't under rule, they were under illusion. But don't get too comfortable, because Marla may have lost the room, but she hadn't lost her script. And what she tried next made the $2,000 0 cents dock fee look like a warm-up act. Stick around, because in Part 4, I find out who really owns the land we've all been standing on, and let's just say, it's not Marla. If you're still with me and loving the ride, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story's about to go from fake fees to full-on land revelations. Trust me, it only gets juicier from here. After that wild emergency meeting, you'd think Marla might retreat, maybe lick her wounds, rework her fake bylaws, or take a long look in the mirror and ask, am I the drama? But no. When people like Marla feel the curtain slipping, they don't exit the stage gracefully, they bring more props. So I did what any man would do after being threatened with a $2,000 0 cents a month dock disturbance fee by a woman whose gavel came from Etsy. I went to the county clerk's office. Public records don't lie, and I wanted to know exactly who I was dealing with. It didn't take long. Turns out, not only was the HOA never officially registered in the state, but Marla Vickery wasn't even a homeowner. She was a renter. Yep, the self-declared queen of shoreline etiquette didn't even own her cardboard castle. She'd been issuing citations from a unit she didn't have the legal authority to decorate without a deposit refund risk. I sat there staring at the paperwork like I'd just uncovered a suburban spy ring. It was all so fragile, like one of those giant Jenga towers built on bad intentions and clip art. Marla had no ownership, no registration, no vote, no standing. She'd built her castle out of printer ink and misplaced confidence, and the tide was coming in. And yet, that's the thing with people addicted to control. When you show them their authority is imaginary, they escalate, and sure enough, the very next day I got a call from code enforcement. "Mr. Avery, we received a complaint about an illegal dock structure on your property," the officer said. His voice was calm, professional, probably tired of inspecting garden gnomes and rain gutters for a living. "Would it be all right if we stopped by tomorrow to take a look?" I smiled and said, "Absolutely. I'll have the permits ready and coffee on standby." I had a feeling this visit wasn't going to go how Marla thought it would. The next morning, I was out on the dock with my cup of joe, flipping through my building permits like baseball cards when the code enforcement truck pulled up. The inspector, Mike Rodriguez, stepped out, clipboard in hand, tape measure swinging at his side like he meant business. "Nice place you got here," he said as we shook hands. "Mind if I take a look at that dock?" I handed him everything. Original survey, construction permits, maintenance history, all stamped, signed, and city approved. Mike took one look, nodded, and said, "This is cleaner than half the new developments we inspect." He paced the dock, took a few measurements, and jotted down some notes. Meanwhile, from the corner of my eye, I spotted Marla peeking out from behind a curtain like a villain in a made-for-TV movie. I could practically hear her holding her breath, waiting for me to get a citation that never came. But instead, Mike turned, pointed across the street, and asked, "What's going on with that garden?" I looked where he was pointing. Marla's infamous concrete-bordered flower bed. You know the one. The aggressive landscaping she'd added to mark her turf like a cat in a power suit. "That's not mine," I said. Mike walked over, gave it a closer look, and said, "These concrete borders? Permanent installation, we've got county code for this. Anything not temporary needs a permit." I choked on my coffee a little. "You're saying that garden's out of code?" He nodded, scribbling something serious-looking on his clipboard. "No permit on file, and it's on rental property. That's a violation." I couldn't help but glance back toward Marla's window, wondering if she could see the poetic justice being served, one garden border at a time. She'd reported me for having a legal dock on my own land, and now the county was citing her for hardscaping a flower bed she didn't even have the right to dig. It was beautiful, it was ironic, it was exactly what this neighborhood needed. By the time Mike handed Marla her citation, her face had gone from flushed pink to deep purple. "This is ridiculous," she shouted. "I'm the HOA president." Mike, bless him, didn't even blink. "Ma'am, there's no HOA on file, and rental status doesn't exempt code violations." That was the final nail. She wasn't just out of line, she was out of character, out of legal standing, and out of options. And yet, instead of backing down, she stormed toward me like I'd personally planted the border bricks. "This is your fault," she yelled. "You turned them against me." I stayed calm. "Marla," I showed the inspector my paperwork. "You showed him concrete without a permit. That's not politics. That's plumbing." She sputtered, cursed under her breath, then spun around and slammed her door so hard it shook the mailbox. But even as she retreated, I knew this wasn't over. Because when someone's whole identity is built on pretending they're in charge, the loss of control doesn't feel like a setback. It feels like exile. That afternoon, I started getting texts from neighbors, screenshots of the citation, photos of Marla arguing with Mike, and one glorious meme someone made of her holding a garden trowel with the caption, "Build Back Bitter." But even as the neighborhood started waking up to the farce, I couldn't help but wonder, why? Why was she going to such lengths to act like she owned a place she only rented? What was she really after? I called Sharon and told her everything. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Colin, I think it's time we take a closer look at your deed." I frowned. "What for?" Her voice dropped a little. "Because something tells me this isn't just about a boat, or a dock, or even Marla's ego. I think you might be sitting on something bigger than you realize." And right then I had no idea what she meant, but I was starting to feel like the guy who just discovered there's a secret door behind his basement wall, and I couldn't wait to open it. When Sharon called and said, "Colin, we need to talk about your grandfather's estate," I assumed it was about taxes or some dusty zoning clause. What I wasn't expecting was to walk into her office and be greeted with a pile of manila folders thick enough to qualify as furniture. She waved me in, cleared a spot, and spread out a survey map that looked like it belonged in a museum. "You remember telling me to keep everything simple when you inherited the house?" she asked. I nodded. I'd been going through the divorce grieving, and frankly, I didn't have the energy to deal with land records or family trusts. I just wanted the keys and some quiet. Sharon pointed to the map. "Well, your grandfather didn't just leave you the house. He left you this." I looked closer, blinking. The shaded area marked in bold didn't just cover my lot, it covered the lake. Not part of it, not a sliver, the entire thing, and the land under 18 out of the 23 homes in the community. "You're telling me I own the lake?" I asked, stunned. Sharon nodded. "And the underwater land rights beneath most of Golden Oaks Landing. Surprise!" It hit me like a cannonball in still water. All this time, I thought I was defending a dock, a square of wood, some peaceful mornings. But no, I was the legal owner of the very lake Marla had tried to ban me from. The same lake she claimed was shared community property was, in fact, privately held by the guy she'd slapped with orange violation stickers and accused of aesthetic crimes against humanity. I sat there, trying to process the irony. It wasn't just a twist. It was poetic justice written in legal ink. Marla had been standing on a soapbox made of fantasy rules, yelling at the one man who actually had the deed to the kingdom. "Why didn't I know this?" I asked. Sharon smirked. "Because you told me," and I quote, "I don't want to deal with any of that complicated crap. Just get me the keys and make it legal." So I did. I put the lake and infrastructure into the holding company your grandfather set up. You've technically been the landlord this whole time. I could only laugh. A short, stunned laugh, like someone who found out they'd been sleeping through their own movie. By Monday morning, the lake had changed. Well, not the water, but everything around it. Marla had installed 4 homemade signs that read, "Public community water, no trespassing, violators will be prosecuted." Each one was laminated, zip-tied to garden stakes, and featured enough exclamation points to qualify as a threat. She also rolled out her latest innovation, Lake Patrol. 3 neighborhood teens in matching t-shirts she'd clearly ordered online, armed with walkie-talkies, whistles, and the kind of awkward authority that only comes when you're being paid by a delusional adult. That's how I met Tyler, a nice enough 19-year-old who knocked on my door, eyes apologetic. Mr. Avery, Marla says you're banned from the water, and I'm supposed to, enforce that?" I offered him a soda and said, "Tyler, do me a favor. Paddle over to the dock with me tomorrow morning, just for the show." He looked confused, but agreed. And just like that, we were headed for the strangest confrontation of my life. Tuesday morning arrived warm and bright, the kind of weather that makes people believe in karma. I was sitting on my dock, sipping coffee like any good landlord of a lake, when Tyler paddled over in a kayak with a life vest and a worried expression. Behind him, I could see Marla filming with her phone like she was producing a neighborhood reality show. "Sir," Tyler said, "you're, in violation of Section Well. Marla says you can't be here." I smiled and stood up slowly. "Tell Marla," I said just loud enough for her to hear, "that I appreciate her concern. But this lake belongs to me." Tyler blinked. "Wait, legally?" "Legally," I said, "historically and ironically." He looked back at Marla, whose face had frozen behind her screen. "Oh, man," he whispered. "She's not gonna like that." "She's not supposed to," I replied. "But that's the beauty of truth. It doesn't ask for permission." The shoreline was lined with neighbors watching the scene unfold. Phones out. Smirks barely hidden. Marla's plan had just backfired in glorious 4K slow motion. And yet, through all of it, I wasn't smug. I didn't puff my chest or make a speech, because this wasn't about ego, it was about clarity. I'd inherited more than land. I'd inherited a legacy. My grandfather had bought this place decades ago, built it slowly, rented lots affordably, and created a peaceful little corner of the world. And now that legacy was being hijacked by a woman with a sticker gun and a superiority complex. But here's the thing about fake authority. It doesn't stand up to real ownership. It can bark, shout, demand, but the moment the deed hits the table, the performance ends. Marla built a cardboard kingdom, and now the storm was carrying it into the lake she didn't know she was trespassing on. And as Tyler slowly paddled back toward shore, I waved to the neighbors who had finally seen who really owned what. For the first time, I wasn't just defending my peace. I was protecting the truth. And the truth had better paperwork. But, of course, Marla wasn't done. She never just accepts reality. She rearranges it like furniture that doesn't belong to her, and what she pulled next? It made the Lake Patrol saga look like a dress rehearsal. Stick around. Because in Part 6, she tries to ban me permanently from the lake I legally own, in front of the entire neighborhood. And trust me, I brought receipts, maps, and a new sign that ends her fantasy for good. I should have known something theatrical was coming the minute I saw Marla pacing in front of the community center with a clipboard in one hand and a printed agenda in the other. Font size, aggressive. She'd summoned the neighborhood for what she called the final vote to preserve community order, translation her last-ditch effort to ban me, yes me, from the lake I legally owned. She had chairs set up like a town hall, a folding table loaded with evidence, and even a laminated community conduct poster taped to the wall, as if professionalism could be conjured with enough Scotch tape. As neighbors shuffled in, I caught a few giving me the look, the kind that says, "Please tell me you brought the nuclear documents?" I nodded. "Oh, I brought the receipts, the original maps, and a brand new sign that would put the final period on Marla's fantasy HOA saga." The truth was about to hit her laminated empire like a lawnmower through a tulip bed. Marla called the meeting to order with a wooden gavel she must have ordered off the same website as her ego. "We're here," she announced, "to vote on the permanent removal of Colin Avery from all community water privileges due to his continued disregard for HOA standards." There it was, the finale she'd been working toward. She clicked her way through a new slideshow, this one featuring me on my dock, circled in red like I was a most wanted poster for peaceful boat ownership. "This behavior," she declared, "undermines everything this community stands for." I stood up and calmly walked to the front. "If I may," I said, "before the neighborhood votes me off my own lake, I think it's time we all take a look at something." I laid out the full property survey, the original deed, the corporate structure set up by my grandfather, and a legal letter from Sharon's firm confirming lake ownership. "This isn't about disrespecting the community," I said. "This is about knowing who owns what and who silence. Not the awkward kind, but the stunned kind. The kind of silence that happens when people realize the person they've been told is the villain is actually holding the original blueprints." I let them read. I pointed to the parcel numbers, the legal boundaries, the lease structure under which most of them lived. Then I reached under the table and pulled out my final piece, a new, professionally made sign that read, "Private property, Sunset Lake, owned by Colin Avery, access permitted with kindness." I held it up, looked straight at Marla, and added, "I believe in community, not control." Her face turned a shade of red, somewhere between cherry and denial. "This is fake," she muttered. "Anyone can print documents." Sharon stood and placed a certified copy of the county land records on the table. Anyone can file ownership with the clerk's office, she said calmly. The tension in the room snapped. Phones came out. Someone started recording. Marla's myth had hit a legal wall. And the bounce back was glorious. Then came the vote. Not the one Marla planned. No, this was a real vote, a spontaneous, neighborhood-led motion to hold a legitimate community election. Irene stood and spoke first. We've let one person speak for us long enough. Let's do it right. Let's vote for someone who represents all of us. Heads nodded, hands went up, and just like that, Marla's presidency crumbled. Not with a scream, but with a neighborly shrug. 22 residents voted, 21 for Irene. 1 abstention. Marla didn't even vote for herself. She stood frozen, still clutching the gavel like someone just told her monopoly money doesn't pay property tax. Someone clapped, then another, and soon the whole room joined in. Not a celebration of drama, but of relief. It was over. Marla's rule by clipboard had ended, and the HOA that never legally existed had been replaced with something real. And just like that, we all exhaled. She left 2 days later. No speech, no tantrum, just a U-Haul, some taped boxes, and a sideways glance as she pulled out of the driveway. A few neighbors waved, some out of politeness, others out of closure. Me? I stood on my dock and watched her car shrink into the horizon, thinking not about revenge, but about restoration. I hadn't come here to be in charge. I came to heal. But sometimes fate hands you the deed to a mess you didn't make, and asks you to fix it anyway. So I did. Over the next few months, we created a real neighborhood council. No power plays, no clipboards, just shared goals and sensible rules. We hosted cookouts by the lake, started a garden club, and even turned Marla's infamous border into a community flower bed, with permits this time. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. In the end, she tried to ban me from the water, not knowing I was the rain, the river, and the title deed she never read. And I didn't need revenge. The truth did all the talking. Stick around. Because in the postscript, I'll tell you what showed up in my mailbox 6 months later, and why it made me laugh so hard I nearly fell off my own dock. And just like that, the neighborhood got quiet again. Not the kind of quiet that comes from fear or tension, but the kind you earn. The kind that means people are finally breathing easy. I didn't hang up a no trespassing sign. I didn't raise anyone's rent or build a moat. I just kept sitting on my dock, sipping coffee over the lake I never meant to own, watching a community rebuild itself not with rules, but with respect. Funny thing is, I didn't fight back with noise. I fought back with paper, patience, and the truth. And in the end, that turned out to be louder than any megaphone Marla ever waved. You know what I learned? That real authority doesn't shout. It shows up, listens, and serves. That some people build kingdoms on fear, while others quietly build bridges. That kindness backed by facts is stronger than arrogance backed by nothing. And sometimes, when life hands you a mess, your best move isn't to run, it's to stand still, steady, and let the truth do the work. I didn't ask for any of this, but I'm glad it happened, because it reminded all of us what leadership really looks like, and more importantly, what it doesn't. So let's get started. So if this story hit home for you, if you've ever had to deal with a fake boss, a petty tyrant, or a rulebook written in crayon, then leave a comment below and tell us your version. Because trust me, you're not alone. Hit that like button if you believe that facts still matter, and make sure to subscribe, because around here, the drama might start with a dock, but it always ends with a deeper truth. Stick around, the lake may be quiet now, but these waters, they've still got stories to tell.